Now, there's a difference that comes in between a surveillance economy and a surveillance state. The surveillance state is the stuff you're more likely to hear on the news, some secret military or law enforcement project where they create some new apparatus to spy on the public. Whether it ends up being a new license plate reader camera that's put over on traffic intersections, or it ends up being something like a new type of spyware that the government end up investing in, and so that they can, again, be able to hack into people's phones and get access to their personal information. Usually the goal for those types of projects is to be able to hunt and take down criminals or terrorists, or better yet, more easily be able to find people committing criminal actions or, stuff that, ends up being seen as illegal, so that they can be able to both not only catch them in the act, but also track them down and then be able to arrest them. Now, the surveillance economy is a little bit different. There are a variety of different surveillance states across the world. For example, North Korea doesn't really end up being able to have the best when it comes with a lot of, stuff you would be able to associate with a cyberpunk dystopia, with a bunch of cameras and sensors everywhere that's kind of collecting information and stuff on people. It usually just ends up revolving around a large sneaker net or a snitch network. Basically, they just encourage a bunch of people to be able to spy on the populace, and if they end up committing a crime, they're supposed to report them, and they get benefits from the government for doing that. They might literally say, snitching on your neighbors might be able to get you like an extra meal ticket or something for your family or something. And if you see something suspicious, you're encouraged to be able to go in and say something so that the government can go in and arrest them. So a surveillance state can simply just be off of incentivizing people to be able to act as rats for themselves. But a surveillance economy, that's a little bit different. So within a surveillance state, the government is the one that's stealing your information. With a surveillance economy, everybody is stealing from everybody, regardless of what even kind of data it is. For example, let me give you an example, right? Imagine if there was like your stove or whatever that was part of an IoT network. So if someone could be able to go in and be able to access the same network that your stove is a part of, are they likely to find out that your stove is defective and is subject over to overheating that could eventually lead to a fire, and then report it to the proper authorities, like say consumer protections, so that they can be able to identify a dangerous product that US households have? Or are they more likely to be able to simply just bet over on the company that ends up manufacturing the stoves and hope it ends up going out of business the minute there's a terrible accident that occurs? Yeah, all that over from a stove that you wouldn't have been able to buy from freaking Home Depot or on Amazon or whatever, just because you thought you could get it for a good price. So that ends up being something that just ends up being one example of how the surveillance economy works. In the surveillance economy, data is more valuable than oil. And they even end up having a different term for it that's come up recently called the AI dollar, but I'll get to that in a sec. So within a surveillance economy, there's a lot of money that various different businesses, criminals, or just random everyday people can be able to make by taking your information. So it's not simply just federal or government operations that spy on people. Everybody ends up being able to have some value when it comes with gaining someone's information. And therefore, there's a lot of different businesses and a lot of different industries invested for the sole purpose of taking people's or other things information. And sometimes it doesn't just have to be people. It can be almost anything. If say your farming equipment, whatever, ends up being able to be have a GPS module attached to it that allows it to be able to connect with satellites that go, well, I guess I couldn't be able to call it a GPS module, but more of like a satellite module or something, so it can be able to connect to different satellites that can then being able to be connected over to other different large-scale networks. That basically just ends up beaming up the quality of the type of soil that you use over on your type of farm, or over on the type of crops that you want to be able to go in and produce or whichever. That's useful for industries so that they, once again, can be able to go in and bet over on whether or not the price of corn or the price of potatoes or whatever is going to be able to go up and down within a given week, or whether or not there's going to be a mass food shortage and therefore a variety of produce and food companies are going to see a massive hike in prices or shut down altogether because they can't get access to the ingredients to be able to make their food. Or let's just be able to say that you're a cyber stalker and you want to be able to find more ways in order to, be able to get a girl that you're basically freakishly obsessed with in order to be able to get her to be able to like you or manipulate her into you wanting to be able to go in and take advantage of her. You can simply just be able to go over on her Facebook profile and being able to find all the stuff that she likes, being able to find what kind of friends or family that she has, basically being able to get a bunch of access to open source information, or I think the term for it is called OSINT, or open source intelligence, and then being able to use the information that you get from her and then being able to use that so you can be able to pretend to nice guy her into thinking that you like the same thing that she does, or you like the same thing that she's got. Or let's even say you don't even get to that point. You can end up being able to dig long enough, you can be able to find out her house, where her relatives and people end up being able to live, or even if she ends up being able to have an emergency, what other backup places she would be able to go to if she were to be able to find herself in danger. Now, to a certain degree, there's certain types of information stuff that can be able to protect you. Surveillance, at least in certain aspects, does not always have to be harmful. For example, there's a lot of different security systems out there that exist almost exclusively so that they can be able to go in and catch people who do end up actually committing crime or are going to be more likely to be able to go in and be able to commit harm to people, or people who end up being very vulnerable to something like a threat or a situation or something like that. So in certain cases, there are use cases in which people do want to be able to protect themselves and their families or something. And in some cases, surveillance can be able to do that. But a lot of problems that, at least me personally, that I have with a large portions of data collection and information gathering, or tools that end up being able to deal with surveillance, isn't necessarily over on the fact of just the fact that it is used so that it can be able to catch people who end up committing crimes or people who end up actually being dangerous to society. My problem usually comes from it on the fact that it's more likely or not to be abused. So the main problem I end up being able to have with surveillance technology is on the fact it's much more likely that it's going to be a private company or a separate third-party service that's going to take advantage of the information that's, again, very sensitive, that eventually ends up being able to get in the hands of, say, some third-party billionaire or some intelligence agency that can be able to do effectively whatever they want once they end up being able to get that information. So yes, there is a lot of user policies and a lot of IT policies that different businesses have and governments themselves have when it comes to protecting information. When you have an IT network, you have to be able to secure your information. But the reason I made this video is because there's been a lot of headway that's been going on both on the news and online of companies exactly not doing that, right? So people have already heard of flock cameras, and there's been a huge privacy scare of what's going on with these license plate reader cameras that are not just being used to scan license plates, but are there to be able to scan people's faces, to be able to identify people and what kind of clothes and stuff that they wear, to identify the streets they happen to be on, and to be able to build up large data sets that profile people by using artificial AI algorithms in order to basically build up a large a large repository of information of people who happen to be able to get scanned or identified by these cameras. And it's not the first time in which the government and other things have invested into this. Like, if we're going to be fully honest, the UK has been known as well, aside from, I'm saying the Israeli government, but they are an entirely separate video, if I'm going to be honest. The UK is investing in surveillance cameras and a variety of other different surveillance measures as far back as the early 2000s. So being able to have a huge amount of surveillance tech being pushed out by law enforcement or the government ain't new. What makes Phlox different, if you see a lot of different videos are going around them, is that they are completely unsafe. They have pretty much not done anything in regards to be able to follow their own security policies for the exact problems that they say would be able to go down in the event that they weren't careful with how they end up using their systems. And it's basically ripe to be taken for cyber criminals and hackers. So, for example, there's a variety of different cameras that are connected to the internet that even the average person, if they were to just look it up on Google, could be able to go in and access. There's a huge amount of hacks that go down online on both the darknet and even over on the regular internet, where you could be able to find jacked IP cameras and just see about what kind of random surveillance and stuff is going down for people all throughout the world. I think you can even, in certain cases, hack satellites if you want to. But what makes Phlox different is that they were explicitly selling this out to law enforcement as a surveillance measure to be able to reduce crime, or at least be able to help assist police officers in being able to catch criminals. But their systems are so lazily put up that it's like they end up basically taking Android phones and sticking them over on lampposts. This feels like something that you would be able to see within, like, say, some Mark Rober or freaking Mr. Beast video, where he just buys out a bunch of cheap phones and just puts them around over within on traffic lights or phones or something like that. Because it ends up being able to have makes the same amount of sense as Phlox's business model, if we're going to be honest. Now, they don't just deal in cameras. I think they're involved with trying to be able to put cameras and stuff like that inside of cars or SUVs and other different types of people's vehicles so that it can spy on them too. This company is dirty as heck. But the reason as to why Phlox ends up being bad isn't just because they're invading people's privacy, isn't just because that police officers are blatantly abusing the system. I think I just read on the fact that 6 officers got arrested a couple days ago for basically using them to be able to spy on their own family members. Imagine that. But also because they're dirt easy to hack. I mean, take one GPU and being able to crack some WP2 encryption, and bingo, you end up basically being in like it's no big deal. I mean, this to me is the main reason I'm really against mass surveillance. It's not simply just because it's a privacy invasion, but because it ends up not really being able to work. It does the opposite effect of what criminals or other things say they do when it comes to preventing crime. No. Criminals are able to do crime and are able to access systems by being able to take other people's information and by being able to collect data. The same type of tactics, ironically enough, used by major retail chains or major cloud services or other tech companies are now being used by these criminals. A lot of them are very much into cybercrime because it provides a lot of anonymity to them when it comes with being able to deal with their, operations, along with the fact that they can be able to simultaneously collect a lot of information on their targets so that they can spy on them. Now, not every single criminal works directly with scamming, or at least scamming as we know it within, with cybercrime and stuff like that. But a lot of them do because it's really easy to be able to make a lot of money, and it's, unless you end up being able to have a dedicated hacker or something, it's really hard to be able to catch them. They could be down over in the freaking Philippines somewhere, being able to scan in a woman who lives in West Virginia by sending her AI deepfakes and then being able to collect the profits as she ends up being able to pay for a service. So what makes Phlox Security and other random startups really dangerous is because of the fact that it's not just in the fact that they're invading people's privacy or in the fact that they're having unauthorized access to a variety of different systems. It's on the fact that they're terrible at it. And they're terrible at being able to do it without being able to have the exact risk that comes in with putting stuff up like this that could also be able to be accessible to the very type of people you don't want him to be able to go in and access. And I keep on thinking to myself, why do so many companies, at least currently right now, are able to be able to set up so many systems like this, and why is it such a massive security risk? I mean, you'll see it all the time about some newer company or whatever that works for some type of surveillance measure. Take COSA, for example. After one of the third-party services they trust to be able to set up pop-up blockers to be able to block a kid from being able to access a site unless they end up putting in their information, they end up being able to get hacked. And then a lot of Discord users end up being able to get their information leaked after a single data breach. So why are so many companies being trusted on this? I think personally it's because they know that the time is ripe for them to be able to go in and set up a lot of these systems, and they can be setting up, surprise, surprise, very cheaply. And the government, who's desperate to be able to just invest in whichever company whichever startup or whatever that can promise them to be able to get more data, to just blindly end up being able to take them at their word because, surprise, surprise, the government himself doesn't know too much regarding around good data policies and privacy. And they're about as reactionary as, say, the average suburban household when it ends up coming up to a new crime statistic within their area, to be able to go in and invest in whatever new security venture ends up being out there on the market so that they can be able to find or survey criminal activity, and I say that with quotes, over within the area. But the issue with this is that a lot of these startups don't know what they're freaking doing, or at the bare minimum, they are have a lot of security risk when it comes with how they end up being able to conduct their operations. Most famously, the biggest and the craziest both privacy invasion and breach that happened recently has come in with Doge. Their whole setup point was that they were going to be able to stop waste, fraud, and abuse within the government, and that their goal was so that they can be able to get access to the government systems, and then being able to both cut and remove a variety of different projects that were costing government money and putting them in a deficit, with the goal of saying that they can reduce the government's deficit. They didn't. They even straight up said that they didn't after everything was said and done. But what really happened was that a crap ton of people's social security numbers were leaked after they put it on a third-party server. That now ends up making it ripe for anybody who wants to be able to access anything of a person's history or their personal information or whatever, or specifically their credit card information, now sees them as easy pickings. And we've also ended up seeing this over on the small scale with something like, say, PBS or whatever, that put a lot of archival data or something over on a third-party service that they eventually ended up losing access to. So it wasn't necessarily a data breach, but more or less that they just lost their information. So basically, the government is basically using third-party services the same way like an average major business would use a third-party service. They have no real clue about what they're doing. They usually take the cloud service at their word that they're going to keep their data safe. It ends up getting breached, or they end up just losing the data altogether. And then everyone ends up looking in with like that surprised emoji on their face. So again, the real reasons why this is being done is because the government itself, it costs a lot of money in order to be able to set up surveillance systems and networks. So it's easier just to be able to trust private industries that go in and make all the stuff and information and stuff for them, rather than being able to go in and being able to directly invest within being able to make the technology itself. Making a lot of this stuff is hard work, and therefore just trusting a business to do it for them ends up being cheaper in the long run. But cheap ends up being the key word here because of how many different instances that go down off of the complete lack of security that comes in with these systems. One, being able to collect more information on people ends up inherently being a massive privacy risk. And B, because they can't secure these systems, they now end up being a national security risk. And that's not just me talking. Different senators of the United States have directly described companies like Flock as being that. So the whole thing that they've been trying to push with stopping crime and stopping terrorists and, trying to be able to stop waste, fraud, and abuse, you have to think to yourself, how do fraudsters and scammers online able to commit fraud? By stealing other people's data and collecting very personally identifiable information about people through weak systems like the ones that the government is funding these companies in order to make. So you have to be able to go in and think to yourself, neither of these guys end up being able to know really about what they're doing, or they're simply just being able to themselves only buying up into the media hype that if you end up having more surveillance, you can be able to stop more crime. That ends up being shaky of a statistic at best, as it ends up being like under 10% of actual crimes end up really being stopped with these mass surveillance systems, and a lot of it ends up being stopped in with other different types of operations that law enforcement or the government goes in and does. So what's the real reasons why they're setting up all these systems? And in my personal reason, it's just profitable. Money. Again, data has a lot more uses outside of crime or catching criminals. We've already seen previously where something even as simple as being able to go to a grocery store and picking up some fish can now be able to be used as some sort of surveillance measure or whatever by a retail chain or by a major conglomerate to simply just find better ways to be able to take advantage of people through the information that they can collect. So what better way of just being able to have more startups or more tech companies to just go in and collect more information over on people and do it under the banner of, oh, it's all for crime, or oh, it's all for being able to stop terror activity within the state or within the nation or whichever. And while there is a lot of differences between what specific type of services that different businesses advertise to the government, like a defense company is not going to have the same mindset of something like, say, a data processor for a major corporate network or whatever. But unfortunately, they do end up being able to have one link, and it's over on the fact that they see data as valuable. And so collecting more of that information is beneficial for a lot of other different means outside of just for, law enforcement or military operations. No more can this be true over on the fact that there's a variety of different companies that were previously part of operations for the military that go corporate. So there's a variety of security services and weird over-the-top, spy devices and stuff like that these companies end up being able to give out to other major corporations and even whole other governments. They basically go private and they now end up selling their services to anyone who ends up being the highest bidder. This ends up more famously being used for, say, the Pegasus spyware that was recently discovered in iPhones a couple of while back that was invested in by ICE and a variety of other different governments for being able to basically infiltrate people's OS and then use it to basically get a lot of their personal information that they have on their device. End-to-end encryption used by a variety of different messaging apps have a weakness because the encryption isn't about being able to protect your device. It's about being able to protect the messages that you send to other people in transit so that people can't be able to go in and basically collect that information over the air and then being able to easily read the message. So it only ends up protecting messages that you send over to people in your group chat in transit. And that's something that's been existing for the internet for a while. Probably around the late 90s, early 2000s, different encryption schemes were created or updated all the time so that they could be able to protect user information. It was basically what was called packet sniffing. But the issue here is that if I can simply just hack the device altogether, it's very likely that if someone's device isn't secure, I can just get all the information that way, which is where you end up being able to get a huge investment in digital forensics tools, like ones that are used over in by airport security, like with Cellbrite, or I think Grayshark, I think what their name is, and where you end up investing directly in spyware that you can put in someone's device so that they can directly hack the phone itself, not simply just being able to intercept messages and calls like, say, a network version of a wiretap. And what makes systems like these really dangerous is over on the fact that it just generally ends up making your system secure. The government loves to be able to go in and say that these are targeted operations, but they're not. It's no more targeted than just requiring everybody inside of a house in a major neighborhood or whatever to always unlock their doors so that the police have an easier time of being able to break in. That doesn't make you secure. That's not targeted, even if you only end up going over into one house. That makes everyone insecure because you're encouraging people to weaken their defenses just so that you can make it easier for you to be able to conduct your operations. Like, criminals like use a lot of tools and stuff to be able to break into people's houses if the lock is good enough. If you just tell people to disable the locks, then all they have to do is just walk in. I think this even ended up happening to one of my family members once, where they ended up having a random person, or I think it was even a kid, that just randomly walked inside of the house. And he wasn't like a criminal or anything. It was just a weird little kid. But for some reason, he just decided to be able to walk into the family member's house or whatever, and it scared the heck out of them. Like, they told me about it after the fact and it already happened, and I was like freaking shocked. I'm like, so he just walked in like that? No deal or nothing? And I swear to you, that actually went down. But while that scenario itself ends up being funny, when it actually has to be able to do with people's actual security, like, say, someone who ends up being in witness protection because they're scared that, like, say, a criminal or mob boss is going to come after them, or even just in a place that ends up have a high number of break-ins. Telling people to be able to unlock their doors just so that the government can be able to get better access is generally seen as a bad idea. And spyware is just the software version of that fact. Basically, their goal is to be able to just go in and tell people to, basically their whole point of spyware is to intentionally be able to exploit vulnerabilities in an OS, or even in certain cases make requirements to be able to have backdoors in the systems, just so that it makes it easier for them to be able to go in and sniff out for information. And the big motto of whatever the government ends up using is, oh, you just don't have to worry if you don't have anything to hide. And that's bullcrap in my opinion, because unfortunately, everyone has something to hide. Hell, the ability to be able to obscure certain types of information or stuff that people have is sort of a basic tenet regarding around privacy, or even about just people being able to have respectable boundaries. You know, for the same reason as to why I wear freaking long sleeve clothes or a hoodie or whichever, or for the same reason why some people end up being able to have doors or a shower curtain. Because there's just certain times where people don't want you to be able to see certain things that they're going in and doing. Not because they're hiding something, but simply just because you can be able to go in and respect their privacy. Everyone ends up being able to hide something, whether you want to admit that or not. And yeah, usually when you see stuff on social media and TikTok of people blatantly, revealing their email addresses or their social security numbers or their PIN numbers, usually those people end up being pretty dumb. But it's TikTok, what do you really expect? But it's a lot more threatening when, even the people who really actually do care about their security, are being told by the government or by a variety of different entities of, hey, I need you to be able to actively give us a way into your security or your bank door or whatever, or sorry, into your network or whichever, so that I can be able to go in and hack it and being able to go in and catch criminals. And as we've already seen with a variety of Border Patrol agents and police officers abusing the system, that might not always be the best scenario. Sure, the reason why companies do it is because they themselves don't want to be able to get sued or be able to have criminal action taken against them for refusing to be able to work with federal agents or the police. I can be able to understand that. But at the same time, on making your systems not secure just so that it makes it easier for someone to be able to get in is not simply something that only the government can do. It's something that any cyber criminal with a good enough rig can be able to go in and do. Yeah, you'll hear about a lot of scams and stuff that's talking about with like card skimmers or phishing emails and stuff like that. But the real meat of people you need to watch out for are just anyone who goes in and sniffs over a bad network. And it's especially gotten even worse when it comes with artificial intelligence, where more people than ever end up having the ability to be able to have some high level degree of hacking, even for something as trite as if they want to go in and see if they can be able to buy a freaking pineapple or like some M&Ms over at a store, and they'll end up doing like X level degrees of agentic coding or whatever and breaking into major conglomerates and networks. Like, it'd be crazy if the company that manufactures M&Ms or whatever ends up being able to find out that their systems were hacked because an agent was just trying to be able to figure out which was the cheapest M&M to go in and buy, right? But my whole point is on the fact that cyber criminals know what they're doing, and the more you end up telling people to make their systems more vulnerable just so that you can get in, the more dangerous it is for other people to get in too. People that, the exact group of people that you don't want inside your systems. And I just end up finding this really crazy on the fact that there's so many different people from regular retail chains all the way up to the U.S. intelligence agencies that are just so like for with being able to create newer ways to be able to erase people's privacy. Like, even back during the 1960s, this kind of shit ends up being able to apply to the internet itself, right? Like, the whole reason as to why we end up being able to have the modern internet, or what was basically back at the time be able to call it ARPANET, was because a lot of intelligence agencies and research groups were afraid that the Russians could either find a way to either break into telecommunications lines or even just cut them off altogether, either through being able to directly attack them via an EMP or a direct, military strike or whichever, or by being able to go in and directly find ways to break into them via a variety of different wiretapping techniques. So the whole reason for why the predecessor to the internet existed in the first place was to be able to secure information. It was there so that they can be able to protect agencies from being able to have their information leak. It was basically a national security risk that they ended up investing in the internet in order to be able to stop. Now, it's not like they hadn't been investing in other ways to be able to find ways to spy on and infiltrate other networks themselves, but they ended up being able to invest in the internet because it was a newer security measure that they could be able to use in order to be able to protect their information across various different outposts that they had throughout the United States. So if even the US military itself knows the value of cybersecurity, then why is it that they're now doing the exact opposite and basically telling every single company, almost every other major phone carrier or manufacturer for wireless devices or whatever, to now be able to go in and being able to get the authority to break in to their phones or their IoT networks or whichever? Because just like I ended up being able to say with the surveillance pricing video, it now encourages more fraud. It's now going to be able to encourage more cyber criminals to be able to get access to more law enforcement or federal resources, Why? Because they simply end up basically creating the biggest data set. Criminals go after the juiciest targets. And like I said, within a surveillance economy, when data is money, whoever's got the juiciest amount of data is the place that they're more likely going to hack. This is why the whole DOJ being able to reveal people's social security numbers were dangerous. One of my first things I learned within a lot of my courses I ended up being able to take for computer science over within college was that social security numbers are one of the juiciest targets for cyber criminals to go in and attack. They literally go in and ask people for their information or for their passwords or for a very specific type of information they can use to identify them. And so it gets a lot more dangerous when you end up being able to have some jackhead startup that doesn't know what they're doing that ends up revealing that information openly over on the public internet for anybody with enough nose to be able to know what happened to be able to go in and sniff out those numbers. And surprise, surprise, you can now be able to have mass cyber attacks or identity theft that's coming in from a variety of other different criminals who wish to be able to exploit a variety of different systems and being able to steal a bunch of people's identities, also that they can be able to commit crime. And usually they can do it a variety of ways, simply so that they can get somebody's money or even to be able to set somebody up for a false crime or say for a, make them their digital persona or profile, make them think that they're doing something that they're actually not, and then being able to use their social security number or whatever as a way of being able to go in and do that. So there's just a lot of risk that comes in with being able to have the federal government collect so much information and have very limited amounts of ways to secure it. So it just ends up becoming a big of a shame to me, man. Like, I'm not saying that the internet was perfect, but my God, was it different even just 10 years ago in comparison for what it was to say today. Like, another factor that I think ends up being able to play into this is artificial intelligence. Take, for example, Meta, who I just gotta be able to say this regarding around like Mark Zuckerberg. Why does he keep naming his companies off of the data that he steals? Like, he goes in and makes Facebook, which is in reference to basically a book of faces or a massive repository of profiles that you look up, or something along the lines of that of a directory that you go and look up to be able to find information about people. Originally, that's what Facebook was. It was basically just supposed to be a college who asked Mark Zuckerberg to be able to create a student directory for them. Then he later down the line ended up turning it into a mass social media platform, all for the purpose of being able to have everyone get a digital equivalent of the college experience. And that might actually be able to explain a lot of problems that are going on with social media to this day, because it turns out when you try to be able to mass market a bunch of people into having the college experience, there's a lot of people that probably shouldn't be able to have that kind of mindset, especially online. But in other cases, his original previous platform, which was FaceMesh, was basically just a cyber stalking tool. Basically went in, got information on a bunch of students in the at his college, and basically was just wondering on whether or not he should be able to smash or pass. Think of it like what Tinder kind of is or was. He ended up being able to create an early 2000s version of it. And then you later down the line, once Facebook gets a lot of heat and trouble and usership is down, he decides to be able to rebrand into Meta, which, I don't know about you, sounds a lot more like metadata, the data of the kind of different computers or networks that you get access to. So you end up knowing more about network information or device information or private user information, the exact kind of data about systems that you don't want people to access, because it's the exact type of data that cyber criminals and other different type of threat actors go for. That's just me. But getting back on topic, Meta usually invests a lot into artificial intelligence, and much like a variety of other different AI startups, or let's be honest, AI tech companies, because startup gives off the impression that they're a small company, but these guys are massive and have a lot of money behind them. Um, I find it kind of funny how a lot of the mindset regarding tech companies have changed within just a few years. Because before, a cyber criminal stealing your information and stealing private information was something that even companies themselves were afraid of being able to get leaked, because, having a bunch of criminals, whatever, steal private information or being able to get access to your services without you being able to pay for it, they lost money because of it. And at the same time, their businesses would be under threat from being able to have people being able to get access to stuff that they should not have gotten access to in terms of what that business was doing with their networks and their software and whatnot. But now you end up having a new technology of large language models, which specifically end up relying on gathering as much data as possible in order for them to be effective. So now the stuff that you would usually see cyber criminals or pirates do to be able to get access over to different kinds of software or various portions of data over online is now something that all the AI companies are doing now. So suddenly stealing information now becomes profitable because they need more of it in order to be able to power their language models. And what's even crazy is over on the fact that Meta has basically just decided to be able to say, screw the foreplay. I'm basically just going to go on pirated sites themselves and be able to take information from those sites that already end up being able to steal a variety of other different stuff, from everything from ebooks over to other different types of things that were pirated, and use them to be able to power my large language models. If someone ends up being able to put up a restriction on an AI company or a particular model or whichever, when it comes to being able to access their data, because I don't want to be able to have an AI poking around over on my networks. So I just go over on the darknet and be able to find someone who's already got data from that network and just use their services or just buy it off from them. Congratulations. Now you have a lot of industries directly invested within cybercrime, also that they can be able to power their models. It also ends up being able to explain why they end up having so many data centers. They're scraping everything, not just the regular user information, not just like the general kind of information you get online. God knows off of how much stuff they're using to be able to feed these beasts. And so that's where you end up being able to have a lot of issues regarding around the land use, regarding around a lot of these data centers being put over in people's houses where they're cutting off their ability to get electricity, they're putting up their electricity bills, they're messing around with their water resources. They're now more water intensive than that of a major golf course. So this is why I wanted to be able to bring it all back to what I was originally saying before with the surveillance economy. Data is money. And now there's a new technology that directly takes advantage of making more money by the amount of data that they go in and collect. So the sad part about what I have to be able to do is on the fact that, like, the sole reason why I have to be able to go in and use artificial intelligence is over within certain areas in which, I'm not really experienced in, or I just want to be able to get some quick information to. I still feel guilty about it because of it being cheating or some stuff like that. But it is what it is. That being said, going back to my original point, there's a variety of other different companies that are now directly using this new technology as a way for them to be able to make money off of the data that they collect. And unfortunately, this ends up being able to have a lot of different, connecting the dots between various different industries, even industries you don't think would be directly associated with data collection, like retail chains, to military operations that are being conducted overseas that later down the line turn private and start selling their services over to American corporations. And then you end up being able to have things like law enforcement are using it for local crime reduction or local operations and stuff like that. And of course, the biggest concern ends up being on the fact that all of this is being done relatively unsafe. So you have a lot of these companies that are investing within these systems, but these companies are lying about how secure these systems really are. And they end up being able to present the very risks over to the very people using these services, as well as the very people they're using these services on. So yeah, that's a lot to be able to go in and take in. And it's not anything really that I don't think a lot of people have already been, know about now. I mean, there's a lot of different people that are waking up over to the fact that I think the main reason as to why there's a huge amount of backlash over on smart tech and technology and whatnot is mainly because companies are just being A, irresponsible, and B, much more invasive than they have been even within by 2010s or 2020 standards, right? We know over on the fact that governments have been spying on us. We know over on the fact that companies can be negligent. We know over on the fact that we have to be able to deal with in the modern world with the internet, we have to be able to deal with things like cybercrime and identity theft. It just feels like rather than being able to actually do something about those issues, they're now being able to invest even more in all of the stuff that we hate about the internet just so that someone can make a little bit extra money. It feels like more of a buyout of being online rather than it is about being able to actually protect people. So it's a shame, but it's going to be what it's going to be in the near future. Otherwise, something massive I think is going to change. But anyways, it's just such a shame to me that, a large portion of the internet now is different than what it used to be. I mean, again, IT services were not originally created just to be able to spy and, invade people's privacy. As far back as, say, like the 1800s, the sole reason why things like the telegraph were created was so that, mail carriers wouldn't be put in danger when going on treacherous rides across state lines and having to be able to deal with bandits or thugs or whichever. So protecting information is important. Excuse me. And so if you didn't finding out there's this new technology that could literally instantaneously send out information to a variety of outposts across the country, then all of a sudden now you end up having a better communication system that was faster and cheaper than what it was of having to be able to pay for treacherous rides across country. Instead of having to go in and have a soldier be able to wait like nearly a month or whatever before they get a reply from their family or whatever from sending them letters, they can instead being able to go in and use, say, a telegraph, or they'd be able to get those messages instantaneously. And there's a lot of other different use cases that came with that. Obviously, more people wanted to go in and talk with each other. Businesses wanted to be able to get more real, up-to-date information. So it's not necessarily over on the fact that communication is a bad thing in and of itself, but over on the fact that there are so many companies and systems now that wish to abuse these systems and being able to use it to manipulate more people. Like the same type of predatory algorithms and stuff that a lot of people you'll see talk about on the internet. That type of stuff ends up being more beneficial to companies because, again, like I said, on things like surveillance pricing, they're collecting people's personal information and using it against them so that they can encourage them to be able to buy more of these products. And say some poor 12-year-old ends up being able to stumble onto stuff like this, and they end up being encouraged to be able to buy stuff that usually ends up being marketed for people twice her age, then to a company, that's just extra money. So it ends up being a shame over on the fact that the internet used to be this place that was more or less marketed mostly over to teenagers because of the fact that it ends up being some new or cool tech that a lot of people get into. And now it feels like it's been bought out and corporatized for years by, private corporations and stuff like that. So that just ends up being a bit of a shame. And regarding around myself, to me, I'm not trying to be able to be some whistleblower. Hell, I'm not. Most of the stuff that I got into, I basically can be able to get public access to online. So it's not like any of this is really secret anymore now. I mean, if anything, more than ever, the government's just like openly being able to just post this information for everyone to go in and see, which I find crazy. But hey, it allows someone like me to be able to make a video like this. I'm taking a risk considering the fact that I might be putting this over on like one of my personal accounts. So it's likely that anybody who goes into it can be able to go in and see like what I've been saying and what I've been doing. But I don't try to be able to do this because I want to be able to put in some paranoia or I'm some, oh, they're always going to be watching me, you know, some Illuminati conspiracy theorist. Because this isn't conspiracy even at this point. This is basically just off of what a variety of the American financial apparatus is just putting up now. Like everybody ends up being able to know this at this point, and fortunately they're getting sick of it. So anyways, that's all I've got for now. So if I want to post up another video, maybe I'll do it soon, but I don't know. But stay safe, everyone.